Jared Thomas, thank you so much for speaking to Love Oz YA today about your latest novel, My Spare Heart, out May 31st. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be with you this afternoon, Alice. Thank you.
Oh, anytime. You're very welcome to come and chat to us. So my first question is, it's about the voice of the novel, because you wrote it and your writing style is very teenaged, if that makes sense. So what I'm really curious about is, was that a deliberate decision? And if so, why? But also, what did you as a writer have to do in order to kind of get into that teenage voice?
Okay, so yeah, I'm writing from the position of 17-year-old Phoebe Ridgway. And so to do that, I guess, well, I'm fortunate to have a teenage daughter, which helps. So I guess, yeah, it was a lot of discussion writing this book with my daughters and trying to get that voice and establish that character. So when I'm writing, I have to really, come to hear the voice of that person. So all of my characters, to really know their idiosyncrasies and their needs and their boundaries and what helps them to stay safe and all of those things. So yeah, there's quite a concerted effort. And then in relation to the topic of My Spare Heart, I spent a lot of time researching, which I can talk about, maybe I'm happy to talk about throughout the interview.
That would be great. And I guess that kind of leads in terms of your research, because, My Spare Heart deals with a number of quite difficult issues, from alcoholism to divorced parents to racism, but racism in a way that was really interesting, because it's how do we address that and what's driving it, to questions of consent. What I'm really interested in is, it's sort of like it's a sub question beneath the overarching topic of the various issues that My Spare Heart touches on. I'm really curious to know what it is that you think about the power of stories is so important, that we need to, and that stories like this are so important to be told, if that makes sense.
Well, maybe if I just start with the bigger issue, and that is about the character of Phoebe, a 17-year-old young woman who's starting to come to an understanding of her mum's problematic relationship with alcohol. So, I believe that many young people have a relationship with a friend or family member that has an addiction issue, or a problematic relationship with a substance, or something else. It's not necessarily a substance. It could be an addiction with a parent who overworks, or a parent who maybe spends too much time on social media, or just doesn't see their child for a number of reasons. So, but in this case, it is about problematic drinking. And yeah, so for me, the power of story, there are so many young people in the world in this situation. And for adults, so there's many people in my life who are experiencing something similar to Phoebe. And those adults struggle with it. And some of them might be able to go, to be brave enough to seek counselling or support. But if you're a young person, where do you start? So for me, it's about writing this story so that young people who may be experiencing something similar can see their story at least portrayed through fiction, and then maybe hopefully provide them a framework for navigating this particular issue. When it comes to the other kind of things that we mentioned, so Phoebe's a young woman with mixed ancestry. So she has an Aboriginal father, a non-Aboriginal mother. It's her non-Aboriginal mother that has the problem with drinking. So just looking at again, looking at my life and my kids' life. So when if I had an issue in my family, it's complicated because race is always going to be there in the equation. You're either dealing with racism that's directed at you, or you're feeling the pain of racism that is very public. So it could be racism that's directed at a role model or someone else in your community. So in Phoebe's case, there's discussion of, well, there's racism that's directed at her, and there's racism in the media that impacts on her as well. Then we throw in questions of like the issue of consent. Again, I'm writing as in this case as a young woman, and that is that's a really critical, important thing for both young men and women. So there's going to be both young men and women that are reading this book, and again, it's something that's real to people. These are the things that that are playing out for young people at present. And I guess Alice, like I really don't want to be preachy about these things, and I'm older now, but it's like when I'm writing, like, what is the power of story? My adolescence was very, very challenging. Everything was being thrown at me. And it's hard to go to your parents or older family and say, hey, how do I deal with this? Right? Because you're embarrassed about it, or you think you're going to get in trouble. So for me, it's like, what are the types of stories that I would have liked to have read when I'm being kind of confronted with racism, having to navigate relationships, being kind of like peer pressured into taking drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. So that's really the position that I write from a lot of the times.
I think you've hit on something that's really, really special, and I think you really special about YA in particular, but about stories, which is that they help you. They give you a framework by which to think about something you might not have, by which to navigate something you might not have the tools to navigate. And what's really amazing to me about YA is that because it's only been emerging in the last 15 or so years, we're giving young people all of these tools and resources and stories that they didn't have access to before. And I think that's really special.
And I think from an Aboriginal perspective, right? Because like where I grew up, like so you have dreaming stories that help you navigate country, right? So there's so many things that can kill you, like there's white pointer sharks, and there's some of the most venomous snakes. There's scarce like water resources as well. So you have all these stories that help you navigate that country. And the characters of the dreaming, they're flawed characters. So through learning about those stories, you're learning how to like look after country and look after self and look after others. But within a contemporary world, like we're not really getting that. So when we go to school, we're taught how to read and write and all the subjects, but we're not really taught those stories about how to look after ourselves. And so I think for me, it's like, again, not wanting to be preachy, but having my characters confronted with all of these challenges, and often those characters are flawed, and the people around them are flawed, because that's, I think that's the reality of humans. There's always shades of grey, and none of us are perfect.
Yeah, and that's my favorite thing about the book, actually, that Phoebe, and I think it's actually in many ways it's the hardest thing when you go from being a child to an adult, is realizing that your parents are flawed people, and they're not, you know, well, within the case of the alcoholism of Phoebe's mother, what she had previously just assumed was normal, she is now starting to unpack and realize, actually, this isn't okay. But the level down is realizing and sort of trying to navigate like the hypocrisy of her dad, and the fact that she says to her father at one stage, will you have a drink? Like, I've seen you have a few glasses of wine, and, you know, what's your stance on drugs? And I think that's such a nuanced approach to take, which is Phoebe's struggle to understand that the people who are fundamentally there to help her and who are on her side and who are by and large doing a pretty good job, that doesn't mean that they're not, that doesn't mean that they're infallible. And so I think that's also a really valuable, nuanced lesson to navigate in story as you navigate it in your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I recently someone said to me, like, it's one of the difficulties of childhood is you're there watching your parents grow up. Okay, because your parents are often only in their 20s and 30s as well. And we're all learning as we go. So yeah, I think, yeah, in the case of Phoebe, like, her parents they're all dealing with a set of complexities. And that is life, you know, and some people work it out better than others or quicker than others. And some people don't work it out at all. And I think in this story, like, it's not that the issues aren't easily resolvable.
And that's also really important, to have stories where, and it brings to mind The Surprising Power of a Good Dumpling by beautiful Wei Chim, in which obviously the story comes to a conclusion and there is resolution, but that doesn't mean everything's tied up in a really neat bow. And that's a really important story for young people to read. You don't get a perfect solution.
Yeah, and that is the case with addiction. You know, like, there's people that maybe haven't drank for 20 years and they still describe themselves as an alcoholic, because it's about a certain relationship with alcohol. And I guess in this book, like, the one thing I was very conscious of is I wanted to tell the story of Phoebe, how Phoebe felt about her mum's drinking, and the impact that it was having on Phoebe and the family members around her. I didn't really want to try to explain alcoholism. This isn't a book about, you know, setting out to explain what alcoholism is. It's looking at people's responses to someone who has a problem with alcohol. So that's quite different. And part of what I did is I actually went to support meetings for people that have a friend or a family member dealing with addiction. So I did that for at least 18 months while writing the book. And yeah, so that was, and again, like, within the book, there's no, yeah, I'm not kind of sharing anything that was shared in those kind of meetings. It was more about trying to distill the essence of those experiences across the set of characters that are featured in My Spare Heart.
And I think that those were some of the most powerfully written scenes, actually, when, you know, you just get that micro snapshot into somebody else's relationship with a parent who is struggling with addiction. I think it was, no, actually, now that you've said it, I can really see how much research went into making it really authentic.
Yeah, so obviously people know about Alcoholics Anonymous in some form. So I didn't know that there was the support. You know, there was support through a type of Alcoholics Anonymous for adults and teens. So there's a support network called Alice, and that's for teenagers that have a friend or family member who's suffering from an addiction or a problematic relationship with drugs or alcohol. So that was a real revelation. And when I was writing, including text from Alateen or Al-Anon, which is the same type of organization, I was paraphrasing things, particularly as it's an anonymous organization. So I wanted to just give a sense. So I was really actually delighted when Al-Anon and Alateen said, no, you need to include this text word for word. So to have their support for the novel.
That's great. And I think it's so powerful because destigmatizes, first of all, it gets the message out about these services and these groups, but it destigmatizes attendance. It tells the story also about how attending these groups can help you. So I think we've got a beautiful thematic consistency across this chat, Jared.
Yeah. So there's kind of like, well, that is a thing, like shame. Shame is like a terrible, one of the most terrible human emotions. And one of the things with, if you have a person with a problematic relationship or addiction, is that you feel embarrassed because of their actions. And sometimes you try to cover that up. Like if you're a kid that has an alcoholic parent, you might feel really embarrassed for yourself, but you're embarrassed for or about them. And then if you were to declare to a friend, hey, dad drinks too much or mum drinks too much and or nana drinks too much, and then gets abusive and dad has to go and help her out or whatever the situation is, that can be deeply embarrassing. And I guess what I wanted people to know through this book is that is so widespread, unfortunately. It's so widespread, it's not defined by ethnicity or cultural background and class. It just happens across all sectors of society. And in this case, like Phoebe's mum is pretty well-to-do. She's had a good career. She's thought her mum's really awesome because she'll get her and her mates like concert tickets and things like this as an event. Organizer has taken her overseas to New York to watch the basketball and stuff like that. But her mum has that problem. And that's reality. Like there's a lot of people that have nice inner city houses and drive nice cars and have a great career, but are really struggling with addiction.
Yeah, and it's no, I think you make that point really well. Final question, and I'm just going to make it end on a light note. What prompted you to have basketball as such a central theme across the novel and in Phoebe's life?
Well, the beginnings of this book came from a conversation with someone in New York. And at that time, I started thinking about, well, I'm in America, basketball. So that was kind of the starting point. The story was about a 17-year-old girl who's really into basketball, but her mum's problematic relationship with alcohol destabilizes her in so many ways. So that was that. And then also I then went on to work with Patty Mills to co-author the game day stories with Patty Mills. So for me, having that real interest in basketball, my daughters playing basketball, and just noticing really the positive effect of sport on mental health. So for me, it's like, I think movement is such an important part of life, and some of us take it for granted, or we don't. We find it hard. But I just think physical activity, it really helps when you have at any stage in your life, and particularly when you have big issues that are happening.
That makes perfect sense, and it's beautifully depicted. I have to confess, I went to my first basketball game maybe 3 weeks ago, and I had a very patient group of people around me who tag teamed explaining everything.
Yeah.
So when I read My Spare Heart, there were a few sections where I was like, and I said to my boyfriend, can you explain this to me? But for probably any other human being who does know what basketball is, most people have at least a basic level of understanding. It's very accessible. It was just, that was an Alice special moment.
Yeah.
But it's beautifully woven through, and everything. It's, I think we started off talking about every single idea and theme and issue across the book, but it's not like it's a laundry list. They are so delicately woven as things that a young person naturally encounters a lot of the time, and encounters as part of their daily life. But for Phoebe, she notices it by virtue of her heritage, by virtue of her relationship with her mother. She obviously notices these things in a more explicit way, and it's a really delicate telling of things that happen to young people, that young people see and encounter and experience, and it offers a way, or it offers her story and how she muddles through it, I guess.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Alice, for reading the book, and for reflecting on it so deeply, and asking me all these great questions.
Oh, thank you so much for your honesty and your generosity answering, Jared. My Spare Heart is out May 31st, and I think it's a must read.